Captain Da-hyun sat alone in his quarters aboard the United Earth Defense Force starship Vigilant. The blue glow of his holographic display cast shadows across his face as he reviewed his new orders for the fifth time. Outside his viewport, the gas giant Titan loomed large, its orange atmosphere swirling beneath the ship's orbit. He rubbed his tired eyes and sighed. The communication from General Park had arrived 3 hours ago, marked with the highest security clearance. Da-hyun's military career had spanned 15 years, with decorations from the Battle of Proxima and the defense of New Seoul. But this assignment felt different. Wrong, somehow. Execute the auxiliary prisoner, the order stated plainly. No trial. No further interrogation. Just elimination. His door chimed, interrupting his thoughts. Enter, he called. Lieutenant Min appeared in the doorway, her expression serious. Captain, the transport to Callisto Station leaves in 30 minutes. Your gear has been prepared. Thank you, Lieutenant. Da-hyun stood and straightened his uniform. Any updates from the front? Yes, sir. The auxiliary have pushed back our forces near Epsilon Eridani. Admiral Kang has ordered a full retreat from the sector. Another defeat. The war had stretched on for 7 years now, with mounting casualties on both sides. Humanity had never expected to encounter another spacefaring civilization so close to Earth, let alone one that attacked without warning or attempt at communication. Any word on why this prisoner is so important? Da-hyun asked. Min shook her head. Only that she was captured during a raid on one of their scout ships. Intelligence believes she has critical information about their next major offensive, and we're executing her instead of trying to extract that information. Sir, the file says she's resistant to all known interrogation methods. And Min hesitated. She's what, Lieutenant? She's one of their psionic specialists. Several guards have reported headaches, nightmares, even hallucinations after spending time near her cell. The general believes she's too dangerous to keep alive. Da-hyun nodded slowly. The auxiliary's natural telepathic abilities had given them a significant advantage in the early days of the war. Human soldiers couldn't hide their tactics or intentions from an enemy that could literally read their thoughts. It had taken years to develop effective psionic shielding. And why me? Da-hyun asked, more to himself than to Min. Your psych profile, sir. You scored in the top percentile for mental resilience and emotional stability. The brass thinks you can resist her influence long enough to complete the mission. After Min left, Da-hyun packed his few personal items into a small bag. Among them was a small stone carving his father had given him before his first deployment, a traditional Korean tiger, symbol of courage and protection. He ran his thumb over its smooth surface before tucking it into his pocket. The journey to Callisto Station took 12 hours in the cramped military transport. Da-hyun spent most of the time reviewing what little information was available about his target. Name: Jia, possibly a phonetic approximation of her auxiliary name. Age: unknown, estimated equivalent to human mid-20s. Position: suspected intelligence officer. Abilities: level 4 psionic, highest recorded in auxiliary captive. There was a single image, a being with humanoid features but distinctly alien. Her skin had a faint purple sheen, almost translucent. Large eyes dominated a delicate face. She didn't look dangerous, but Da-hyun knew appearances meant nothing in war. Callisto Station hung in the darkness of Jupiter's shadow, a massive ring structure that served as humanity's most secure detention facility. As Da-hyun's transport docked, he was met by Security Chief Ta, a broad-shouldered veteran with a cybernetic left eye, a souvenir from the Battle of Europa. Welcome to hell, Captain, Ta said with a grim smile. We got 23 of the most dangerous auxiliary prisoners in this facility. Your target is the newest addition. They walked through sterile corridors, passing checkpoints where guards in heavy armor stood watch. The lighting was kept deliberately bright. Auxiliary preferred darkness and struggled to use their abilities under intense light. Has she spoken at all? Da-hyun asked as they approached the high-security wing. Not a word, not even when they were cutting into her to study how her nervous system works. Taz's voice held no sympathy. These monsters killed my family on the New Beijing colony. Far as I'm concerned, they all deserve worse than a quick death. Da-hyun didn't respond. He understood the hatred. Everyone had lost someone in this war, but he couldn't share it. Not without knowing why they were fighting in the first place. The auxiliary attack had come without warning or explanation, and 7 years later, humanity was no closer to understanding their motives. They stopped outside a reinforced door marked with warning symbols. "She's in there," Ta said. "Psionic dampeners are running at maximum, but we've still had 3 guards request transfers after standing watch. Whatever she's putting in their heads, it's nasty." "I'll need to see her alone," Da-hyun said. Tai raised an eyebrow. "That's not protocol, Captain. My orders give me full discretion. I need to assess her myself before carrying out the execution." After a moment's hesitation, Ta nodded. "Your funeral. The execution is scheduled for 800 tomorrow. General Park wants it done quickly and quietly." When Tai left, Da-hyun remained outside the cell, gathering his thoughts. He checked his sidearm, a neural disruptor that would shut down the prisoner's brain functions without physical damage. Quick and painless, they said. Humane. But Da-hyun had never executed a prisoner before, only killed enemies in combat. This felt different. He took a deep breath, activated his personal psionic shield, and pressed his palm to the scanner. The heavy door slid open with a soft hiss. The cell was small and stark. A single bunk, a waste reclamation unit. Bright lights embedded in every surface. And in the center, sitting cross-legged on the floor, was the alien girl. Her head lifted as he entered, and Da-hyun felt a sudden pressure behind his eyes, like the beginning of a headache. Their prisoner was indeed trying to get into his mind. His training kicked in, and he visualized the mental barriers that would keep her out. "You won't be executed until tomorrow," he said evenly. "I'm Captain Da-hyun Kim. I've been assigned to assess you one final time." The auxiliary's eyes widened slightly, the first indication that she understood his words. Then she spoke, her voice surprisingly melodic despite the harsh translation by his comm unit. "You are different from the others," she said. "You question your orders." The bright, stereo light of the detention cell cast hard shadows across the small space where Da-hyun stood facing the alien prisoner. His hand instinctively moved to the neural disruptor holstered at his hip, a reflex born from years of combat against her kind. The auxiliary sat motionless, her slender frame somehow managing to appear both fragile and dangerous at once. "How did you know I question my orders?" Da-hyun asked, keeping his voice steady despite his surprise. Jia's violet eyes studied him with unsettling intensity. "Your mind has edges, sharp places where doubt cuts against duty." She tilted her head slightly. "The others who guard me have smooth minds, polished by certainty." Da-hyun felt another gentle push against his consciousness, like waves testing a seawall. His psionic shield training had prepared him for brutal assaults, not this subtle probing. It was almost curious, not aggressive. "Stay out of my head," he warned, adjusting the settings on his personal shield generator. "I'm authorized to use sedatives if you attempt psionic interference." "Yet you haven't," Jia observed. She uncrossed her legs and stood in one fluid motion. Even with her hands bound by energy restraints, there was a grace to her movements that seemed almost choreographed. "You want answers more than you want obedience." The air recyclers hummed in the background as Da-hyun considered her words. They were too accurate for comfort. "Tell me why your people attacked our research outpost," he said, changing tactics. 7 years of war, millions dead, and we still don't know why it started. Jia moved closer, stopping when she saw his hand tighten on his weapon. "What if I told you we ask ourselves the same question? Why did humans destroy our monitoring station near what you call Proxima Centauri?" "That's not what happened," Da-hyun replied automatically, but doubt crept into his voice. The official history was clear. Unprovoked auxiliary aggression had started the conflict. "Look at me," Jia said softly. "Really look." Against his better judgment, Da-hyun met her gaze directly. Her eyes weren't solid violet as he'd first thought. They had depth, with flecks of silver scattered like stars across their surface. The moment their eyes fully connected, the room seemed to fall away. Images flooded his mind, not forced upon him, but shared. A peaceful settlement with crystalline structures, a family unit with 3 parents and 2 children. Then chaos as explosions tore through the settlement. Bodies twisted in pain. Ships with human markings visible through smoke-filled skies. Da-hyun stumbled backward, breaking the connection. His heart raced, and sweat beaded on his forehead, despite the cool temperature of the cell. "What was that?" he demanded, though he already knew. "Memories. Her memories." "The truth," Jia said simply. "Or at least my truth. The attack that my people responded to. The reason I joined our defense forces." Da-hyun shook his head, trying to clear it. "It could be fabricated. Your kind can create false impressions." "Yes," she agreed, surprising him. "We can. But fabrications lack texture, details, the smell of burning polymer composites, the specific sound of my younger sibling's cry, the exact color of the blood pooling beneath my parents' body." Her voice remained calm, but Da-hyun saw her hands trembling slightly within their restraints. Either she was an exceptional performer, or the pain in those memories was genuine. "Why show me this now?" he asked. "You must know why I'm here." "To kill me," Jia stated without emotion. "But first, you will listen, because unlike the others, you might actually hear." The intercom on the wall buzzed, interrupting them. "Captain Kim, status report," came Security Chief Ta's voice. Da-hyun pressed the response button. "Assessment ongoing. No issues to report. Remember your shield settings, Captain. These creatures can get in your head faster than you think." After the intercom went silent, Da-hyun turned back to find Jia standing by the small viewport that looked out into the blackness of space, Jupiter's massive form partially visible at the edge. "Your species is so young," she murmured. "Barely a century in space, and already at war with the first intelligence you encounter. Did you never wonder why?" "Every day," Da-hyun admitted. "But wonder doesn't change orders." "But it might change actions," Jia countered, turning to face him again. "You were chosen because your mind is strong. What they don't understand is that truly strong minds question. They seek truth, not comfort." She took another step toward him. Da-hyun knew he should maintain distance, but something about her movement held him in place. She stopped an arm's length away. "I can show you more," she offered. "Not just my memories. Information about who really benefits from this war. About the surveillance ships that watch both our species destroy each other." "Surveillance ships?" Da-hyun frowned. "What are you talking about?" "The Mayan. The third party. The scavengers who wait for civilizations to weaken themselves, then move in to take what remains." Jia's voice took on an urgency that hadn't been there before. "They've done it across 3 star systems that we know of. Always the same pattern: subtle provocations, manipulated communications, then retreat to watch the war they engineered." It sounded like desperation, like a prisoner saying anything to stay alive. Yet something in Da-hyun resonated with her words. There had always been inconsistencies in the war's official narrative, details that didn't quite align when examined closely. "You realize how this sounds," he said. "Convenient. A common enemy to unite against, just when I'm ordered to execute you." Jia nodded. "I do. That's why I don't ask you to believe my words." She raised her bound hands. "I ask only that you verify them before you kill me. Access file XE7291 in your military database. It contains an analysis of unknown energy signatures detected during the first 3 battles of the war." Da-hyun's eyes narrowed. How would you know the designation of a human military file? Because it was created after capturing one of our intelligence officers who had been tracking the same energy signatures on our side. She lowered her voice. We are not so different, Captain. Both searching for answers while our leaders push for more destruction. The lights in the cell flickered briefly. A routine power cycle in the station systems. In that momentary dimness, Da-hyun saw Ji's skin illuminate slightly from within, patterns of light tracing beneath her translucent skin like glowing circuitry. Tomorrow at 800 you can complete your mission, she said. But tonight, you can seek the truth. The choice reflects not what you owe your military, but what you owe yourself. Da-hyun checked his timepiece. 7 hours until the scheduled execution. 7 hours to either confirm her claims or determine they were manipulations. 7 hours that suddenly felt inadequate for the weight of the decision before him. I'll look into it, he said finally. But I make no promises about what happens at 800. As he turned to leave, Ji spoke once more. Captain. He paused at the door. In your language, my name means brightness. In mine, it means truth seeker. Perhaps that is not coincidence. The cell door slid shut behind him with a definitive hiss, leaving Da-hyun standing in the corridor, with questions multiplying in his mind and the memory of violet eyes that had seen far too much suffering. Da-hyun's boots echoed against the metal floor as he made his way through the dimly lit corridors of Callisto Station's secure data center. Most of the station had shifted to night cycle, with only essential personnel still on duty. He nodded to a passing security officer, trying to appear casual despite the tension knotting his stomach. The data terminal room was empty when he arrived. He placed his palm on the scanner and spoke his authentication code. Captain Kim, Da-hyun. Authorization Bravo 79 Delta. The system hummed as it processed his identity. A green light flashed, and the door slid open. Inside, rows of terminals glowed with soft blue light. He chose one in the far corner, away from the door and security cameras. Computer, access classified file XJ7291. He instructed after activating the terminal. Security clearance required. The system responded. Please state purpose of access. Da-hyun hesitated. Mission preparation. Prisoner execution requires full background. A pause, then. Clearance granted. File accessed. His eyes widened as documents flooded the screen. Reports from the early days of the war, analysis of energy readings, communication intercepts, all marked with the highest security classifications. The file was massive, containing years of accumulated data. He opened the first document, dated 1 week before the official start of the war. It was a technical analysis of unknown energy signatures detected near the human research outpost that had been destroyed in the first Xilari attack. Unidentified vessel present in sector for 72 hours prior to Xilari aggression, the report stated. Energy signature does not match known Xilari configurations. Da-hyun frowned. If this was true, why wasn't it in the official history? He continued reading, moving through documents chronologically. 3 hours passed as he absorbed information that contradicted everything he'd been taught about the war. The scattered pieces began to form a disturbing picture. Unknown ships had been present at nearly every major engagement in the early war. Communication systems on both human and Xilari vessels had experienced unexplained failures just before critical incidents. Most stunning of all, a captured Xilari officer had insisted their attack was in response to a human strike that, according to Earth's official records, had never happened. Computer. Access records of Operation Silent Dawn, Da-hyun said suddenly, remembering Ji's words. No record found for that designation, the computer replied. Strange. He tried another approach. Computer, search for any classified operations near Proxima Centauri system in the month before the war began. The system hesitated longer this time. One record found. Operation Morning Light. Top security clearance required. Override. Emergency Protocol Epsilon 3. Authorization Kim Alpha 74. The emergency override would be flagged for review, but not until morning. By then, either he would have answers or none of it would matter. Override accepted. Displaying file. What appeared on the screen made Da-hyun's blood run cold. Operation Morning Light had been a covert mission to destroy what intelligence had identified as a Xilari weapons platform near Proxima Centauri. The mission had been successful, but the target had not been a weapons platform. According to the mission's own after-action analysis, it had been a civilian monitoring station. A mistake, a terrible mistake, buried under classification and then used as justification when the Xilari retaliated. Da-hyun's hands shook as he continued searching. He found scattered references to a species called the Mayan, just as Jia had said. They were described as technological scavengers with advanced cloaking capabilities. Several intelligence reports speculated they might be exploiting the human-Xilari conflict, but these reports had all been flagged as low confidence and apparently dismissed. Captain Kim. The voice behind him made Da-hyun jump. He turned to find Colonel Yoon standing in the doorway, his face expressionless in the blue light of the terminals. Colonel. Da-hyun acknowledged, trying to discreetly close the files. Interesting reading for the night before an execution, Yoon said, stepping into the room. Especially files that have nothing to do with your current assignment. Just being thorough, sir, Da-hyun replied, standing at attention. Yoon's eyes narrowed. The prisoner got to you, didn't she? They're more dangerous than we thought. Sir, with respect, have you seen these reports? The evidence suggests we've been manipulated into this war, both humans and Xilari. I've seen them, Yoon said flatly. I was part of the team that compiled them. The admission stunned Da-hyun. Then you know. I know that war is complicated, Yoon interrupted. I know that soldiers follow orders, and I know that some truths are too dangerous to be widely known. Yoon moved to the terminal and closed all the open files with a few quick commands. The Mayan, if they exist at all, are beyond our ability to fight right now. We have enough trouble with the Xilari. But if both our species knew the truth. Think, Captain, Yoon snapped. 7 years of war. Millions dead on both sides. What happens if we suddenly announce it was all based on a mistake and possibly the manipulation of a third party? The political fallout would tear our coalition apart. The Xilari leadership likely faces the same problem. Da-hyun stared at the colonel, realization dawning. You're saying our leadership knows. They know we're fighting an unnecessary war. I'm saying the situation is more complex than a prisoner would have you believe. Yoon responded carefully. The execution will proceed as scheduled. That's an order, Captain. And if I refuse? Yoon's hand moved to his sidearm. Then I'll find someone else to do it. And you'll be in the cell next to hers, charged with treason. The threat hung in the air between them. Da-hyun weighed his options. Direct confrontation would accomplish nothing. I understand, sir, he said finally. I'll complete my mission. Yoon studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Good. Get some rest, Captain. 800 comes early. After the colonel left, Da-hyun remained in the data center, his mind racing. Everything Jia had told him was true, or at least matched with classified information his own military had hidden. The question now was what to do with that knowledge. He couldn't save her through official channels. Any appeal would have to go through the same command structure that was burying the truth. But he had 7 more hours until the execution, 7 hours to find another way. Da-hyun straightened his uniform and headed for the door with newfound determination. His path had been clear before. Follow orders. Execute the prisoner. Continue the war. Now the only clear thing was that he couldn't follow that path any longer. As he walked through the corridors toward the detention block, a plan began to form in his mind. It was risky, possibly suicidal, and would certainly end his career, if not his life. But for the first time since receiving his orders, Da-hyun felt something that had been missing. Certainty. He would need access to the prisoner again. He would need to convince her to trust him. And most importantly, he would need to find a way off Callisto's station with evidence that could no longer be buried. The guard at the detention block checkpoint looked up as Da-hyun approached. "Captain," he acknowledged. "Bit early for the execution. Final interrogation." Da-hyun replied smoothly. "We've received new intelligence that the prisoner might have valuable information after all." The guard checked his orders. "I don't see any." "Direct from Colonel Yoon," Da-hyun interrupted. "You can confirm with him if you'd like, but he just went off duty and mentioned something about not being disturbed for at least 4 hours. The guard hesitated, then shrugged. "Go ahead, sir. Your clearance is still active." As the heavy door to Ji's cell slid open once more, Da-hyun found her sitting in the same cross-legged position as before, as if she hadn't moved in the hours since he'd left. Her violet eyes opened slowly, focusing on him with immediate recognition. "You found the truth," she said simply. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Da-hyun replied, stepping inside and letting the door close behind him. "And now we need to find a way to make others see it too." Da-hyun moved quickly through the dim service corridor, the soft hum of the station's life support systems masking their footsteps. Jia followed close behind, her restraints removed and her movements fluid despite her weeks in captivity. The emergency lights cast an eerie red glow across her purple-tinted skin. "The maintenance bay is 2 levels down," Da-hyun whispered, checking his wrist display. "We have 18 minutes before the next security sweep." "And then?" Jia asked, her voice barely audible. "There's a supply shuttle scheduled for departure to the Europa Research Station. If we can get aboard undetected, we can break away once we're beyond Callisto's security perimeter." A distant alarm began to wail. Da-hyun froze, then checked his display again. "That's too early," he muttered. "Someone must have checked your cell." Jia placed her hand on his arm. "We should separate. You still have a chance to." "No," Da-hyun cut her off. "We're in this together now." He had made his decision when he stunned the guard and erased the security footage from Ji's cell. There was no going back to being Captain Kim, loyal soldier of Earth, not after what he'd discovered. They reached a junction where the corridor split 3 ways. Da-hyun hesitated, trying to recall the station schematics he had studied. "This way," he decided, pointing to the left passage. "It's longer but avoids the main security checkpoints." As they hurried forward, the station's public address system crackled to life. "Attention all personnel. Security alert. Prisoner escape in progress. Armed and dangerous Xelari female accompanied by human male. All non-security personnel are to remain in secured areas." "They're not mentioning you by name," Jia observed. "They're still hoping to contain this quietly." Da-hyun nodded grimly. "That won't last long." They reached a maintenance ladder that would take them down to the lower levels. Da-hyun went first, descending quickly while keeping watch below. When he reached the bottom, he signaled for Jia to follow. As she climbed down, a sudden flash of light from above caught Da-hyun's attention. He looked up to see a security drone hovering at the top of the shaft, its camera lens focusing on them. "Move," he shouted, drawing his sidearm and firing at the drone. The shot connected, sending the device spiraling into the wall with a shower of sparks, but the damage was done. Their location was compromised. They sprinted through the lower corridor, the sound of boots and voices growing louder behind them. The maintenance bay was just ahead, its massive doors currently open as workers loaded supplies onto the shuttle. "We need a distraction," Da-hyun said, scanning the area. His eyes fell on the environmental control panel on the wall. "Can you use your abilities to affect electronic systems?" Jia hesitated. "It's difficult with unfamiliar technology, but I can try." She placed her hands against the panel and closed her eyes. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the lights throughout the corridor began to flicker wildly. Alarms blared at random intervals, and the nearby doors started opening and closing on their own. Amid the chaos, they slipped into the maintenance bay, Workers were scrambling to respond to the malfunctions, paying little attention to two more people moving with purpose across the floor. The supply shuttle sat with its cargo ramp down, half-loaded with containers. Da-hyun led the way toward it, trying to appear as if they belonged there. "Stop right there, Captain Kim." Colonel Yoon's voice echoed across the bay. Da-hyun turned to see the colonel standing 30 meters away, flanked by 4 security officers with weapons drawn. "Step away from the auxiliary and put your hands up," Yoon commanded. "This doesn't have to end badly for you." The workers in the bay had frozen, suddenly aware they were in the middle of a dangerous situation. Da-hyun calculated the distance to the shuttle. Too far to make a run for it. "It's over, Da-hyun," Yoon said, his voice softer now. "You're a good soldier. You were just confused by the prisoner's psionic manipulation. We can help you." "I've seen the files, Colonel," Da-hyun replied, raising his voice so everyone in the bay could hear. "Operation Morning Light. The Mayan interference. We started this war with a mistake, and now both our species are being harvested by a third party while we destroy each other." Yoon's expression hardened. "Security, take them both. Lethal force authorized on the auxiliary." "Wait." A new voice entered the confrontation. Lieutenant Sung, the shuttle pilot, stepped forward from where he had been overseeing the loading. "What is he talking about, Colonel? What is Operation Morning Light?" "Stay out of this, Lieutenant," Yoon snapped. "This is a security matter." But Da-hyun saw the opening. "Lieutenant, there are classified files showing that the auxiliary attack that started the war was retaliation for our strike against what we thought was a weapons platform. It was a civilian monitoring station. The whole war is based on a mistake." The workers and crew were murmuring now, looking between Da-hyun and the colonel with uncertain expressions. "This is treason, Captain," Yoon said, his finger tightening on the trigger of his weapon. Suddenly, the lights in the bay dimmed completely, plunging the area into darkness except for emergency lighting. Da-hyun felt Jia's hand grip his arm. "Now," she whispered. As security officers shouted in confusion, Da-hyun and Jia sprinted for the shuttle. Behind them, Colonel Yoon was ordering his men to restore power and secure the bay doors. They raced up the cargo ramp, Da-hyun heading straight for the cockpit, while Jia hit the ramp control. The shuttle's systems were already active, Lieutenant Sung having been preparing for departure. "Do you know how to fly this?" Jia asked as the ramp began to close. "Basic training," Da-hyun replied, hands flying over the controls. "It'll have to be enough." The shuttle's engines roared to life just as the emergency lighting in the bay returned. Through the viewport, Da-hyun could see Colonel Yoon shouting orders, his security team taking up positions with clear lines of fire. "Hold on," Da-hyun warned as he engaged the thrusters at maximum power. The shuttle lurched forward, scraping against the bay floor as it accelerated toward the partially open exterior doors. Warning lights flashed across the control panel. They were moving too fast for the safety protocols. Weapons fire pinged against the hull as they shot through the narrowly open doors, tearing off a piece of the shuttle's outer plating in the process. Alarms blared throughout the cockpit. "Hull breach in cargo section," the computer announced. "Sealing emergency bulkheads." Jia strapped herself into the co-pilot's seat as Da-hyun fought to stabilize their flight path. Callisto's surface fell away beneath them, Jupiter's massive form dominating the view ahead. "They'll send fighters after us," Da-hyun said grimly, checking the damage report. "We need to reach the jump point before they catch up." "Where are we going?" Jia asked. Da-hyun entered coordinates into the navigation system. "New Geneva. It's an independent colony in the asteroid belt. They've maintained neutrality throughout the war. If we can get the evidence to their media outlets, neither Earth nor the auxiliary leadership can suppress it." The shuttle shuddered as a warning shot passed close by their port side. On the scanner, 3 military interceptors were closing rapidly from Callisto Station. "They're ordering us to return or be shot down," Da-hyun said, reading the incoming transmission. Jia looked at him, her violet eyes reflecting the emergency lights. You can still go back. Tell them I forced you to help me escape. Da-hyun shook his head. Too late for that. He opened a channel to the pursuing craft. This is Captain Kim. I am carrying evidence of critical importance to both human and Silari civilizations. We request safe passage to neutral territory. The only response was another warning shot, closer this time. Worth a try, he muttered, pushing the shuttle's engines beyond their recommended limits. The jump point was still 10 minutes away at their current speed. The interceptors would reach them in 5. Jia suddenly straightened in her seat. There's another ship out there. Not human. Silari. She closed her eyes, concentrating. No, different. Older somehow. As if in response to her words, a massive shadow appeared ahead of them, seeming to materialize from the emptiness of space. A ship larger than any Earth vessel Da-hyun had ever seen, its surface covered in strange, angular patterns that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The pursuing interceptors broke off their chase immediately, veering away from the unknown craft. Mayun, Jia whispered, her voice filled with both fear and confirmation. The giant ship hung motionless before them, blocking their path completely. Da-hyun's hands hovered over the controls, unsure whether to attempt evasion or wait. A transmission appeared on their communications display, symbols unlike any human or auxiliary language, shifting and changing as if alive. Yet somehow, both Da-hyun and Jia understood the message perfectly. You have discovered us. Now we must decide what to do with you. The massive Mayan ship loomed before their small shuttle, its dark hull absorbing the light from Jupiter's distant glow. Inside the cockpit, Da-hyun and Jia sat in tense silence, watching as strange symbols continued to scroll across their communication screen. They're scanning us, Jia said softly, her fingers pressed against her temple. I can feel them. Searching. Da-hyun gripped the controls tighter. Can you block them? Like you did with me. She shook her head. Their minds are different. Older. More. Layered. The shuttle systems suddenly went dark, then reactivated a moment later. The engine shut down without command, leaving them drifting toward the massive alien vessel. They've taken control, Da-hyun observed, trying each system and finding them all unresponsive. We're being pulled in. A new message appeared on their screen. Resistance unnecessary. You carry information. We wish to discuss. Discuss. Da-hyun exchanged a glance with Jia. They've been manipulating our species into killing each other for 7 years, and now they want to talk. They didn't expect anyone to discover their involvement, Jia replied. We've surprised them. The shuttle was drawn into a cavernous opening in the Mayan ship's side, the vast docking bay large enough to hold dozens of vessels their size. As they passed through the atmospheric shield, gravity shifted subtly. Their craft settled onto the deck with a gentle thud. What's our plan? Da-hyun asked, checking his sidearm. We need their data, Jia said decisively. If they've been monitoring both our civilizations, they'll have records proving the manipulation. That's more convincing than anything we could say. The shuttle's exit ramp opened without their input. Outside, the bay was eerily empty. No welcoming party, no guards, no visible crew of any kind. They're waiting for us, Jia said, rising from her seat. I can sense them. Many minds, all connected somehow. Da-hyun followed her down the ramp, his hand never straying far from his weapon. The air in the bay smelled strange. Not unpleasant, but alien, with hints of something like cinnamon and ozone. They walked across the vast empty space, their footsteps echoing. At the far wall, an opening appeared, revealing a corridor that lit up as they approached. They're guiding us, Jia observed. The corridor led to a circular chamber with walls covered in constantly shifting patterns of light. As they entered, the patterns intensified, forming shapes that reminded Da-hyun of neural networks. 3 figures materialized in the center of the room. They were tall, nearly 2 meters in height, with slender bodies that seemed to shimmer between solid and translucent. Their faces had features reminiscent of both humans and Silari, yet distinctly different. Large, multifaceted eyes, no visible nose, and narrow mouths that didn't move when they spoke. "The escapees," said one, its voice emanating not from its mouth but seemingly from the air around them. Human and Silari, working together. An unexpected development. "Why have you been manipulating our species into war?" Dahyun demanded, stepping forward. The central figure tilted its head. Direct, emotional, typical human approach. It turned to Ja. "And you?" A Silari accepting a human as ally rather than prey. Equally unexpected. "You haven't answered his question," Jia said calmly. The three Mayan exchanged looks, communicating in some silent way. Finally, the one on the left spoke. "We are observers, collectors. Your species have technologies and biological adaptations of interest. War accelerates development. War reveals potential. You've caused millions of deaths." Dahyun shouted, his hand moving to his weapon. "Irrelevant," replied the man. "Both species reproduce quickly. Population loss is temporary. Knowledge gained is permanent." Jia stepped between Dahyun and the aliens. "You misunderstand us. Our lives aren't resources for your research. Each death is a universe of potential lost forever." The central Mayan moved closer, studying Jia with its faceted eyes. "Interesting perspective. You value individual units over collective advancement." "We value both," Dahyun said, calming himself. "But advancement through cooperation achieves more than advancement through destruction." The three Mayan conferred silently again. The patterns on the walls pulsed more rapidly, forming complex equations and models that shifted faster than the eye could follow. "We have observed 17 species across this galaxy," the right Mayan finally said. 15 destroyed themselves or were absorbed by others. Only the Mayan survived by following our methodology. "And the 17th?" Ja asked. "Still evaluating," the Mayan replied. "They showed promise by detecting our presence. Now they show greater promise by forming cross-species cooperation, despite our efforts." Dahyun realized with a start that they were talking about humans and Silari. "You're testing us," he said. "This whole war, it's an experiment." "All existence is experimental," the central Mayan stated. "The question is whether your species are worth preserving in our catalog." Jia stepped forward boldly. "We don't need your permission to exist, but we do need evidence of your interference to end this senseless war." The Mayans seemed to shimmer more intensely, their forms becoming less distinct. Providing such evidence would contaminate the experiment. "The experiment is already contaminated," Dahyun argued. "We found you despite your efforts. Others will too, eventually, but millions more will die needlessly before that happens." The chamber fell silent except for the soft hum of energy flowing through the walls. The three Mayan had become almost transparent, their outlines barely visible. Then, without warning, a small crystalline object materialized in the air between them and floated toward Jia. "Data," the central Mayan's voice explained as Jia carefully took the crystal. "All records of our operations regarding human and Silari civilizations. Unexpectedly, your cooperation has provided more valuable data than continued conflict would." "You're just giving this to us?" Dahyun asked, suspicious. "The experiment has entered a new phase," the right Mayan said. "We will observe how two naturally hostile species attempt coexistence after discovering manipulation. This has greater research value." The patterns on the wall suddenly converged into a single bright point, then expanded outward in a flash that momentarily blinded both Dahyun and Jia. When their vision cleared, they were alone in the chamber. "Are they gone?" Dahyun asked, blinking away the afterimages. Jia closed her eyes, concentrating. "No, they're still here, watching, but they've stepped back." A new message appeared in the air before them. "Your shuttle has been repaired and enhanced. It will reach any destination within your combined territories. We will be observing the outcomes. They found themselves back in the docking bay, standing beside their shuttle. The hull breach had been seamlessly repaired, and the engines hummed with energy unlike anything Da-hyun had ever heard. "Do you trust this?" he asked, gesturing to the crystal Jia still held. "No," she replied honestly, "but it's the best evidence we're going to get." As they boarded the shuttle, Da-hyun noticed the navigation system had been modified. It now displayed both human and Silari territories with unprecedented detail. A new destination had been added, the location in neutral space, equidistant from Earth and the Silari homeworld. Peace Summit Point, the label read in both languages. "They're still playing games with us," Da-hyun muttered as he strapped in. "Perhaps," Jia acknowledged, securing the crystal in a storage compartment. "But now we're changing the rules." The shuttle lifted off smoothly, accelerating at speeds that should have crushed them against their seats. Instead, they felt nothing as the massive Mayan ship shrank behind them and disappeared, seeming to fold into itself until no trace remained. 3 days later, representatives from both human and Silari governments met at the coordinates provided by the Mayan. The shuttle's enhanced communication systems had broadcast the evidence across both civilizations, making it impossible for leaders to ignore. Da-hyun and Jia stood together in the observation lounge of the neutral station hastily constructed for the summit. Beyond the viewport, ships from both species maintained careful distances from each other, decades of hostility not easily forgotten. "Will it work?" Da-hyun asked quietly as they watched diplomats from both sides exchange careful greetings. "Can we really end this war?" Jia's hand found his, her cool fingers intertwining with his warm ones. "The Mayan underestimated us once. I think they're underestimating us again." Below them, the first joint human-Silari declaration was being signed, a statement acknowledging the manipulation and declaring an immediate ceasefire. "They think we're just another experiment," Da-hyun said, "but they don't understand what happens when enemies become allies against a common threat." Jia's violet eyes met his brown ones, the connection between them now comfortable and familiar. "No, they don't. And that will be their mistake." In the darkness of space beyond the station, unseen by any instruments, 3 shimmering forms observed the proceedings with growing interest. The experiment had indeed entered a new phase, one with outcomes even the ancient Mayan could not predict. As the ceasefire announcement spread across human and Silari territories, celebrations erupted on countless worlds. For the first time in 7 years, the light of hope outshone the darkness of war. And somewhere in that celebration, a human soldier and a Silari truth seeker stood side by side, their unlikely alliance the first bridge between worlds that should have been friends all along.